I sat in my armored Maybach, watching through the tinted glass at my mother, kneeling in the mud by the fence of my estate, and there was no anger in her eyes, only a strange, unbearable feeling of pity for me. The engine whispered softly, the climate control maintained a perfect 22 degrees, and her one old jacket was soaked to the bone in the autumn rain, as the guard stood motionless, like a statue, 3 steps away, awaiting my order. She had come only to give me the old, worn-out notebook of my younger brother, who, as I had learned only an hour ago from the official police report, had voluntarily taken his own life, leaving behind only a single note, which contained a single word, "I'm sorry," and, looking at her grey hair sticking to her haggard forehead, for the first time in 15 years I felt not pride in my financial triumph, but a real, physical nausea from my own existence, realizing that those billions in my accounts had cost me not just time or effort, but something much more, the last link to humanity, which now, in the mud at my Golden Gates, looked like a ghostly memory. Just as I was about to roll down the window to shout something cold and formal, something like, "Hand her over to the guard and have him take her away," I saw her stand up, shake her hands, and in the last ray of the fading autumn Sunday, her gaze caught mine for a moment, pierced the armor of the glass, the philosophy of my cynicism, and crashed into me with a single phrase, which she uttered loud enough for me to hear even through the soundproofing: "I don't want anything from you, son, I just want you to know that he left because of your article in the newspaper. Now live with it." I opened the door, and this act alone, stepping out of my safe, sterile cocoon, was the hardest decision of my entire period of business empire. I did it because her words, like hot metal, killed the last remnants of indifference in me, making me remember the day when I publicly disowned my brother and mother in an interview to save face in front of investors, calling them relics of the past, a drag, and unworthy of an inheritance, and now, as the rain washed the dirt off her face and I looked at my reflection in the glass of the Maybach, the reflection of a successful, brilliant, but empty monster inside, I realized that the true price of my success was not only in billions, but also in one broken fate that ended at the very moment when my career reached its apogee. I watched her back as she slowly walked away from the gate, and I couldn't bring myself to scream, apologize, or just go up and hug her, because I felt that the dirt wasn't on her clothes, but deep inside my soul, and it had already become an inseparable part of my brilliant but cursed life, which had just had its unexpected, dramatic beginning. I went into the house, and holding in my hands a scribbled notebook filled with childish dreams about space and hopes, I felt how my world, built on the bricks of indifference and cynicism, was slowly but inevitably beginning to fall apart. My mother's message became that invisible crack in my ideal ivory tower that began to expand with terrifying speed, turning into a real earthquake that threatened not only my billions, but also the fabricated reputation that I had so carefully built over the years, using the best PR people, lawyers and manipulation. I realized that the only way to save myself was to use all the resources to make the world believe that the death of my brother, this failed artist, was simply a tragic accident, and not a direct result of my public cruelty, and that my mother, in her grief, was simply manipulating the facts. But as I sat down to write a formal rebuttal, my phone rang and the name of Andre, my former business partner and the only person I had ever trusted more than myself, flashed on the screen until he decided to take the biggest piece of the pie and was kicked out of the company by me for only a small, humiliating share. His voice was strangely calm, almost sympathetic, which only increased my inner unease, because I knew that his sympathy was a prelude to the real blow. "It's terrible what happened to your brother," he began, and I felt a cold sweat break out on my back. "But I'm calling not out of sympathy, but because you've forgotten one important thing. Your brother wasn't just an artist, he was our archivist, our keeper of the secrets, the ones you'd so carefully buried beneath the foundations of our empire, and he didn't just walk away, he left behind something that now lies on my desk. Your signatures, your real, illegal deals that will show the world how you really made your first billion, and since I am no longer your partner, but only someone who has a desire to restore justice, I think your mother will be pleased to learn that her son is not just cruel, but a real criminal, and this information will go to the press if you do not transfer the controlling stake to me." I hung up, feeling the ground disappear from under my feet, realizing that my life was not a shiny facade of success, but just a house of cards built on lies and betrayal, ready to collapse at the slightest breath of wind. Instead of throwing my lawyers and PR people into the fray, I opened my brother's old notebook, and on the last page, among the drawings of non-existent constellations, I found a hidden phrase, written in a childish but firm handwriting: "The blue light will show the way," a phrase that explained nothing but threw me into an abyss of doubt. Was my brother a victim of my cruelty? Was he a pawn in someone's bigger game? Did he really know more than I could imagine, and having lost my reputation, my fortune, and, most importantly, my hope of redemption, I realized that I was now not an all-powerful billionaire, but simply a betrayed, frightened man standing on the ruins of his life, searching for an answer that could cost me everything. When the world began to crumble to dust, and Andre, without waiting for my answer, had already begun leaking fabricated, but, unfortunately, partially true documents to the media, which instantly caused a collapse in my company's shares and the threat of a federal investigation, I felt abandoned and defenseless, being a prisoner of my own golden cage, from which there was no way out. I spent 3 days, almost awake, going through the pages of my brother's scribbled notebook, looking for at least some clue to the phrase about blue light, and had almost lost hope when, rereading the old, naive stories about space pirates that he had invented as a child, I came across his underlined remark in the margins, made in pencil: "Only N knows the code from the stars," and it immediately shot into my memory with a name that I had been trying to erase from my life for years: Nadia, my first and only true love, the same woman whom I had betrayed at the beginning of my career for the sake of a profitable but soulless marriage to the daughter of a tycoon, who guaranteed me access to the necessary investment funds. Nadia was an astrophysicist, a fanatic of the unknown, the person who always laughed at my thirst for material goods, and, most importantly, she was the only one who maintained the warmest, naive relationship with my brother, who saw in her not just a scientist, but a kindred spirit, and I realized that blue light and code from the stars were not metaphors, but, most likely, scientific terms that they both used in their strange, understandable only to them conversations about the hidden possibilities of the universe. I found her address in an old notebook, and a few hours later, having left my Maybach in the garage and driven an old, unremarkable Ford, I found myself outside her modest house, crammed with books and telescopes, feeling not like a billionaire but like a thief who had come to the scene of a crime to finally repent. She opened the door, and her eyes, deep and full of calm wisdom, radiated neither condemnation nor pity, but only a strange, alienated compassion as she looked at my broken face. "I know why you have come," she said quietly, inviting me inside. "Your brother always knew that, like Icarus, you would sooner or later burn your wings. But he also left you a chance, what he called your redemptive anchor." She led me to my brother's old desk, covered with constellation maps and formulas, and pointed to a single, seemingly blank sheet of paper tucked into a book about the Fermi paradox, and when she held the paper up to an ultraviolet lamp, it glowed with a dim blue light, revealing text in her brother's handwriting. It was not a will, not an apology, but a complex, detailed description of a large-scale financial scheme that Andre had been using, and most importantly, it listed not only the names but also the specific locations of the servers that contained real evidence of data falsification by my own company, which I had blindly trusted, evidence that revealed a picture of a world where I was not the sole master, but only a pawn in a gigantic game created by my supposedly betrayed partner, who was actually just a tool in the hands of much larger pieces on the chessboard of the financial world. Finding out that my brother, instead of blaming me, had actually spent the last months of his life gathering evidence against Andre and his puppeteers, he had essentially given me the weapon to destroy not only the man who had driven him to despair, but also the entire shadowy structure that held the strings of my empire. I felt a strange mixture of anger and remorse, realizing that my indifference had cost him his life, but his sacrifice had given me a chance at real, not fake, redemption. Nadia, like a professional strategist, quickly analyzed the documents, discovering that leaking this data to the media or handing it over to the government would only lead to my complete destruction, since the financial connections were so intricate that I would look not as a victim, but as an accomplice, and the only way out was to stage a complete bankruptcy, lure Andre into a trap so that he would believe in his victory, and at the same time hand over this data to independent international journalists, risking losing absolutely everything, but retaining the chance to expose the real culprits, clearing her brother's memory and at least partially justifying herself to her mother. I looked at Nadia, who was sitting in the light of the screen that showed the graphs of my stock's decline, and her calmness, genuine determination, and lack of any desire to take revenge on me for my past betrayal, gave me the strength I had lost in the world of gold and cynicism. If we do this, I will lose absolutely everything, Nadia, I said, feeling a strange, unpleasant, but honest chill of fear. The estates, the company, the name that I have built over the years. I will become a beggar and a criminal in the eyes of the public, and either prison or complete loneliness awaits me. She looked up at me, and there was no shadow of doubt in them, only pure, scientific logic and human wisdom. You will lose the facade, but for the first time in your life you will get a chance to be real, she replied. It's not about money, it's about what you choose, to continue living the lie you created, or to risk everything to restore your brother's memory and find your real self. This is the moment when you have to stop relying on the power of your capital and start relying on your humanity, on the anger you have, and on the remorse you have finally felt. This is your last chance for redemption. The next day, ignoring the advice of lawyers and calling Andre, I suggested to him that if he came to my office tonight, I would sign an agreement to transfer a controlling stake to him, and that was my all or nothing. I knew he would come, tempted by the final victory, and at the same time Nadezhda was already preparing the explosive package of evidence that my brother had left on his code from the stars, to pass on to the journalists who would be waiting for our provisional team. When he entered my, now almost empty, office, his smile was confident, victorious, but for the first time in years, I felt not like a defeated billionaire, but like a man who had finally found his moral compass. And his first words, "You see, money always wins, you were too weak to play big," only strengthened my determination to press the invisible button, realizing that this action would put an end to my past, but open the door to an unknown but honest future. When Andre, feeling the bitter taste of my betrayal, was raging in my office, realizing that the documents I had slipped him were just blank papers, at the very moment when independent media agencies began publishing shocking revelations prepared by my brother and Nadia, I felt my entire fake life, like a scattered sand mandala, disappearing into oblivion. I no longer controlled anything. My company was under investigation, my accounts were frozen, and my name had become synonymous with betrayal and corruption, and I stood in the midst of the ruins of my empire, feeling not fear, but a strange, liberating relief, as if a multi-ton burden of cynicism and the need to constantly maintain this illusion of success had finally been lifted from my shoulders. Andre was arrested a few hours later. His accomplices began to panic and turn each other in, and his last words to me, "You lost, you are now nobody, you will have to start from scratch," did not cause any reaction in me, because he was talking about a financial defeat, and I was thinking about a moral victory that cost me everything, but gave me the opportunity to look at myself in the mirror without disgust. I did not escape responsibility. Federal prosecutors brought charges against me based on the same data as Andre, and I knew that I was facing a real prison term for old machinations, and I decided to accept it as a given, as the only honest way to close this chapter. A year later, in a modest meeting room in the prison where I was serving my sentence, Nadezhda came to me. She was no longer my romantic interest, but my moral compass, someone who would support me through the darkest moments without promising an easy way out. And looking at her calm face, I realized that the true value of life was not the glitter of gold but a pure, unbreakable bond. She handed me a letter from my mother, which contained only 2 sentences, written in crooked handwriting. "I heard what you did. You restored your brother's honor. That's all I needed." I cried for the first time since the day I left them, realizing that redemption came not through millions but through an honest act that cost me everything, and that nothing turned out to be my greatest asset. I began writing a book based on my brother's notes and my own experiences, where I spoke frankly about the financial world, its cynicism, and the true price of success, a book I called Message from Beyond the Stars, a message that the real truth will always surface, even if it is hidden under tons of money and lies. Is it possible to be rich and honest? Maybe, but definitely not the way I took, and looking at the empty walls of my cell, I realized that true wealth is the freedom that comes not from money, but from a clear conscience, and maybe one day, once released, I can build a life where there is no room for compromise with my own soul. I lost everything, but finally found myself.